I just secured a landmark victory for community trust, weary but triumphant. Yet within minutes, a police officer held a gun to my face on my own street, shattering my world and exposing the very divide I fought to mend. The exhaustion was a heavy blanket, the kind you can't kick off on a warm night. It had been a marathon session at the Capitol, a brutal 17-hour debate over the Community Trust Act. We'd won, by a razor-thin margin, but a win is a win. I remember smiling as I finally slipped my key into the ignition of my sedan, the leather seats cool against my tired back. The victory felt hollowed out by the sheer effort it had taken, but it was there, a small glowing ember in my chest. The bill I championed, the one aimed at building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve, was going to the governor's desk. Driving through the manicured, tree-lined streets of my own neighborhood usually calmed me. The quiet, sleeping houses, the perfectly symmetrical lawns. It was the picture of suburban peace, the very thing I worked to protect in a different way under the Capitol dome. Tonight, though, the silence felt heavy, oppressive. My mind was still buzzing with amendments and filibusters, with the faces of my colleagues, some triumphant, some furious. I was just a few blocks from my front door, already picturing the satisfying click of the lock and the glass of water I'd have before collapsing into bed. That's when the world dissolved into flashing red and blue. My heart didn't so much as leap as it did sink, a heavy stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. It's a familiar feeling, a Pavlovian response conditioned into me over a lifetime. I glanced at the rearview mirror. A police cruiser hugging my bumper, lights painting my car in frantic, alternating strokes of crimson and sapphire. Seriously? I thought, a wave of weary annoyance washing over me. I checked my speedometer, 2 miles under the limit. My turn signal had blinked its dutiful 3 times at the last intersection. My tags were current. I sighed, pulling over to the curb beneath the soft orange glow of a streetlight. I've done this a dozen times. The routine was second nature, a grim ballet of self-preservation. I turned on the dome light, killed the engine, and placed both hands palms open on top of the steering wheel. I rolled my window down all the way. Then I waited. The officer who approached my window was young, his face a mask of stern concentration that didn't quite hide the nervous energy in his eyes. He kept one hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the darkness, dancing across my face, my dashboard, my hands on the wheel. It was blinding, intentionally so. "Good evening, officer," I said, my voice steady, professional. It was the same tone I used to address the Speaker of the House, calm, respectful, and betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my gut. "Is there a problem?" He clipped, his voice tight. He didn't answer my question. His eyes darted around the interior of my car, lingering for a moment on the leather briefcase on the passenger seat, stuffed with legislative documents. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "Of course," I replied. "My license is in my wallet in my back pocket. My registration and insurance information are in the glove compartment. Which would you like me to get first?" I spoke clearly and slowly, telegraphing every potential movement. This was the most dangerous part of the dance. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded, ignoring my question again. The accusation was thick in his voice. The question stunned me. It was so blatant, so absurd. "I'm sorry?" "This neighborhood," he repeated, shining the light back in my eyes. "We've had reports, a suspicious vehicle, casing the area. This car matches the description." "My car? A 3-year-old dark gray domestic sedan? It matched the description of half the cars in the state." I could feel a hot spike of anger, but I forced it down. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. "Officer," I said, my voice still even, "I live here. My house is 2 blocks down, on the corner of Elm and Sinclair. I'm State Representative Alon Hayes." He scoffed, a small, sharp, dismissive sound. "Right, license and registration. Now." "Okay," I said, taking a slow breath. "I'm going to reach for the glove compartment now, officer. My hands are moving slowly. I'm just getting the registration." I moved with exaggerated slowness, my fingers stretching towards the latch. The click of the glove compartment opening sounded like a gunshot in the silent car. As I reached inside for the small packet containing my documents, his entire demeanor shifted. "Freeze! Don't move!" he screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. My hand froze, hovering over the car manual. I looked up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. His hand was no longer resting on his weapon. It was holding it. The sound of the holster unsnapping was followed by the terrifyingly solid click of metal. He was holding his service pistol in a two-handed grip, aiming it directly at my face. The black circle of the barrel looked like a bottomless pit, an eclipse that threatened to swallow the entire world. All the air left my lungs. The bills, the debates, the title, state representative, it all evaporated. I was just a black woman in a car, staring down the barrel of a gun held by a terrified man who had already decided I was a threat. "Officer," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, my name is Alana Hayes. I am a state legislator. My ID is in my wallet." He took a step back, his aim unwavering. His face was pale in the flashing lights, his knuckles white on the grip of the gun. He wasn't listening. He was seeing something else, a suspect, a threat, a reason to be afraid. "I don't care who you are," he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and authority. "I said don't move. One more twitch, and I swear to God I will put you down." "Put you down," echoed in the small space of my car, the same words a person might use for a rabid animal. My mind fractured. A part of me, the legislator, was already cataloging the violations, the unprovoked escalation, the failure to identify a credible threat, the clear profiling. But the other part, the human part, was screaming. It was a primal terror that hollowed out my bones and turned my blood to ice. My entire life, all the work, the degrees, the elections I'd won, the laws I'd written, it all meant nothing in this moment. The only thing that mattered was the trembling finger of this young, terrified officer resting on the trigger of his gun. "My hands are on the wheel," I said, forcing the words through a throat that felt like it was closing up. My voice was a thin, reedy thing I barely recognized. "They are flat on the wheel. You can see them." I needed to keep him talking. I needed to anchor him in reality, because he was somewhere else entirely, a place where every shadow was a monster. "My name is Alana Hayes. I live at 214 Sinclair Avenue. Please, just run my plates. You will see this car is registered to me at that address." His breathing was ragged, harsh pants of air. His eyes, wide and unfocused, darted from my face to my hands and back again. The gun didn't waver. He was a statue of fear and aggression. I could see the pulse beating in his neck, a frantic drum beneath his pale skin. He was just a kid with a gun and the power of the state behind him, and he was seconds away from making a mistake that would shatter both of our lives forever. The irony was a physical pain in my chest. I had just spent 17 hours fighting to pass a bill that included enhanced de-escalation training, and here I was, about to become a statistic because of the complete absence of it. Then a new sound cut through the tension. The distant wail of another siren, growing closer. Headlights swept across the intersection behind us. Back up. A wave of relief so potent it almost made me dizzy washed over me, followed immediately by a fresh surge of fear. Would a second officer calm the situation, or would he validate this kid's panic, creating an echo chamber of lethal force? The second cruiser pulled up behind the first, its own lights adding to the chaotic, silent disco painting the street. An older officer got out of the passenger side. He was built like a retired linebacker, with a thick salt and pepper mustache and a look of weary competence. He didn't rush. He walked deliberately, his eyes taking in the whole scene. His young colleague, weapon drawn on a woman in a sedan with her hands on the steering wheel. He didn't draw his own weapon. "Daniels," the older officer's voice was a low growl, a stark contrast to the rookie's high-pitched panic. "What have we got?" "Sarge, she matches the description," the young officer, Daniels, barked, not taking his eyes or his gun off me. Suspicious vehicle. I pulled her over. She started making furtive movements towards the glove box. Furtive movements. The clinical, dehumanizing language of a police report already being written in his head. The sergeant came to stand beside Daniels, positioning himself so he could see me clearly. He looked at me, then at my car, then back at me. His eyes were sharp, analytical. He wasn't looking at a suspect. He was looking at a person. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "please continue to keep your hands on the wheel." "They haven't moved, Sergeant," I said, my voice shaking with relief. Finally, a rational adult had entered the room. "Daniels, lower your weapon," Sergeant Miller commanded. "But Sarge, she—" I said, "Lower your weapon, now." There was no arguing with his tone. Slowly, reluctantly, Daniels lowered his pistol, though he kept it in a low, ready position, still aimed in my general direction. The relief was so profound I felt my shoulders slump. The immediate, suffocating threat of death had receded, just slightly. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Sergeant Miller asked, his eyes still locked on mine. "Alana Hayes, State Representative Alana Hayes. My home is 2 blocks from here. I was just coming home from the Capitol." As the word state representative left my mouth, I saw a flicker of something in the sergeant's eyes. Recognition? Doubt? Before he could process it, Daniels exploded again. "Look," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my passenger seat. "The briefcase, on the seat. I told you, Sarge, she's a burglar. She's been robbing houses. It's probably full of stolen laptops and jewelry." My leather briefcase. The one filled with copies of the Community Trust Act and notes from the floor debate. The absurdity would have been laughable if it wasn't so terrifying. "Daniels, stand down," Miller barked, stepping towards him. "That's an order." But Daniels wasn't listening to his sergeant anymore. He was lost in his own narrative, his own fear-soaked fantasy. He saw the briefcase, and it was all the confirmation he needed. He lunged past his superior officer, his hand reaching not for his gun, but for the handle of my car door. I screamed as the lock clicked and the door was yanked open, the cold night air rushing in like a tidal wave. The violation of my personal space was so sudden, so violent, it sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. One moment I was in my sanctuary, the next the boundary was gone, and Officer Daniels was leaning into my car, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot and smelled of stale coffee. His eyes were wide, manic. He wasn't seeing a legislator. He wasn't even seeing a person. He was seeing a prize, a capture, the culmination of his suspicious vehicle theory. "Get out of the car! Get out of the car now!" he screamed, his voice a raw, desperate thing. His hand shot out and grabbed my left arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like a vice. Pain, sharp and searing, lanced up my arm. The shock was electric. "Let go of me!" I yelled, my voice finally breaking free from the grip of fear and finding the steel of indignation. "You have no right!" "Daniels, what the hell are you doing?" Sergeant Miller roared, grabbing the younger officer by the shoulder of his uniform and trying to haul him back. But Daniels was a man possessed, fueled by a potent cocktail of adrenaline and confirmation bias. He yanked harder on my arm, trying to drag me from the driver's seat. My seatbelt locked, holding me in place. The strap cut painfully into my shoulder and across my chest. I was being pulled in 2 directions, the seatbelt and the officer, engaged in a grotesque tug-of-war with my body as the rope. I twisted, trying to relieve the pressure, trying to get away from his grasp. My briefcase, the supposed treasure chest of stolen goods, slid off the passenger seat and tumbled onto the floor, spilling its contents. A cascade of paper, committee reports, voting records, a copy of the state budget, spread across the floor mat. There were no laptops, no jewelry, just the mundane, bureaucratic evidence of my life's work. Daniels didn't even notice. His entire focus was on me, on subduing the threat he had manufactured in his own mind. Sergeant Miller finally got a solid grip and ripped him away from my car door. "Get back to the cruiser. That is a direct order." Miller shoved him hard, putting himself between Daniels and me. Daniels stumbled back, breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger and confusion. He looked like a child who just had his favorite toy snatched away. "She was resistant, Sarge. You saw it." "You created the situation, you idiot," Miller bellowed, his professional calm finally shattering. He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of profound apology and sheer exhaustion. "Ma'am, Representative, I am so sorry. Are you okay?" I was anything but okay. My arm throbbed where Daniels had grabbed me. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my rib cage. Humiliation and rage churned in my stomach. I took a shaky breath, trying to regain my composure, to find the voice who commanded respect on the House floor. "No, Sergeant, I am not okay," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Your officer just assaulted me. He pulled a gun on me for no reason, and then he physically assaulted me, all while I was parked on a street in the district I represent." I looked past him at Daniels, who was now leaning against his cruiser, head down, still panting. "I want his name and his badge number, and I want yours." Sergeant Miller nodded slowly, his face grim. "You'll have it, ma'am, I promise. My name is Sergeant Robert Miller, badge 714. His is Officer Kyle Daniels, badge 928. He looked utterly defeated. "We received a call about a suspicious vehicle, a dark sedan, circling the block. Daniels was the first on the scene." "Circling the block?" I asked incredulously. "Sergeant, I have security cameras on my house. They will show you that I drove straight here from the Capitol building. I wasn't circling anything. I was coming home from a 17-hour workday." The weight of it all seemed to land on Miller's broad shoulders. The flimsy pretext for the stop, the catastrophic escalation, the identity of the person in the car. It was a perfect storm of failure, and he was standing in the middle of it. He opened his mouth to say something, but another voice cut through the night. "Everything all right over here?" I looked up. A man in a jogging suit was approaching from across the street, a small terrier on a leash trotting happily beside him. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired history teacher who lived 3 houses down. He was holding his phone in his hand, its screen glowing. "Evening, Bob," Sergeant Miller said, his voice laced with weariness. "Just a routine traffic stop." "Didn't look very routine to me," Mr. Henderson said, stopping on the sidewalk. He looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Alana, are you hurt? I saw the whole thing from my window. I called 911 when he drew his gun on you. Then I started recording. Got it all right here, from the moment he pulled you over." I started recording, hung in the air, heavier than the humid night. The flashing lights seemed to stutter for a beat. I looked at Mr. Henderson, a man I'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with about the weather and his prize-winning roses, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought me to my knees. Then I looked at Officer Daniels. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. He looked from Mr. Henderson's phone to my face, and for the first time that night, I think he finally saw me. Not a suspect, not a threat, but the architect of his career's sudden and spectacular implosion. Sergeant Miller let out a long, slow breath. It was the sound of a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. He ran a hand over his face, the picture of a veteran officer who had just witnessed every single thing he tried to train out of a rookie come to a head in the worst possible way. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice gravelly, "we appreciate your concern." It was a weak deflection, and we all knew it. "Concern?" Mr. Henderson scoffed. "Sergeant, with all due respect, I was concerned when your man treated our state representative like she was on America's Most Wanted. Now, I'm just a witness." He took a deliberate step forward, his little terrier sniffing at the curb, oblivious to the drama. "Alana, do you want me to send this file to anyone? Your office? The press?" The offer was a lifeline, a cannon aimed squarely at the blue wall of silence that I knew could easily close around this incident. But before I could answer, another car pulled up. This one wasn't a cruiser. It was a black SUV with official plates. The chief of police, a man I'd met with just last week to discuss the very bill I'd been celebrating hours before, stepped out of the passenger side. His face was a thundercloud. Someone, likely the dispatcher who heard Mr. Henderson's 911 call about an officer holding a woman at gunpoint, had escalated this all the way to the top. The chief strode into the middle of the scene, his presence immediately sucking all the remaining oxygen out of the air. He didn't look at me or Mr. Henderson. His eyes were locked on Daniels, a glare so hot I thought it might leave a burn. "Officer Daniels," the chief's voice was dangerously calm, "place your weapon in your vehicle. Then place your badge and your service ID on the hood. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation." Daniels looked like he'd been punched. He stammered, "But Chief, the suspicious vehicle report." "The suspicious vehicle report came from your own cruiser, Daniels," the chief cut him off, his voice dripping with contempt. "The dispatcher has you on record calling in a suspicious vehicle matching the description of a dark sedan 2 minutes before you initiated this stop. There was no citizen report. You invented the pretext." The revelation was stunning. He hadn't just profiled me. He had manufactured the entire basis for the stop from thin air. He had gone hunting. Sergeant Miller visibly flinched, the betrayal clear on his face. The chief turned to him. "Sergeant, you'll be on desk duty until I figure out what role you played in letting this circus happen." Then, finally, he turned to me. The anger on his face softened into something resembling deep professional regret. "Representative Hayes, there are no words to express how sorry I am. This is an embarrassment to my department and to the city. This is everything we are trying to fix." I finally found my voice, the one I used to command a chamber of my peers. "Chief, sorry isn't enough," I said, my words clear and sharp despite the tremor in my hands. "I spent 17 hours today fighting for a bill to build trust. Your officer just burned that bridge to the ground in 5 minutes. He didn't see a constituent. He didn't see a homeowner. He saw a black woman in a nice car in a nice neighborhood and decided she was a criminal. And when I identified myself, he didn't believe me." I gestured towards Daniels, who was now fumbling with his badge, his hands shaking. "That isn't a training issue, Chief. That's a cancer." The next few hours were a blur of formal statements, internal affairs investigators, and the arrival of the press, who had gotten wind of the story from a source inside the department. Mr. Henderson's video went viral before sunrise. By the time I walked out of my front door the next morning, my story was the lead on every local news station and was quickly getting picked up by national outlets. Officer Kyle Daniels was fired within the week. Sergeant Miller was demoted. The fallout was swift and brutal. My office was flooded with calls of support, but also with the ugliest kind of hate mail. I became a symbol. For some, a symbol of systemic injustice, and for others, a target for their rage. But something else happened. My bill, the Community Trust Act, which had been facing a potential veto from a skeptical governor, suddenly had unstoppable momentum. The video of my traffic stop became Exhibit A in the case for reform. It was no longer a theoretical debate about policy. It was a visceral, undeniable reality. The governor called me personally to apologize and assured me he would sign the bill the moment it hit his desk. He did, in a public ceremony a week later, with me standing right beside him. It wasn't a perfect victory. It was a resolution born from trauma, a reform forged in the crucible of my own terror. I still feel a phantom grip on my arm sometimes, a cold dread when I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror. But when I drive through my neighborhood now, I don't just see quiet, sleeping houses. I see Mr. Henderson's house, and I remember that the fabric of a community isn't just the law. It's the people willing to bear witness, to step out of their homes and into the flashing lights and say, I see what's happening, and it's not right.